So Flint, why is it still going on?
Yeah.
Why is there still unclean water all these years later?
You know, it's easy to look at a circumstance like the Flint water crisis and point just to when policymakers decided to change the water source, which corroded the pipes, which leached lead into the water in Flint. But the story of Flint goes back far further than that decision in 2014. It goes back to decisions made decades earlier about who got to live where, right? When poor, largely black folks moved in to Flint, they were not given the same jobs as everybody else during the Great Migration. They were forced into the peripheries, most marginalized parts of town. And then GM, which really built out Flint's economy, when they decided to leave, the folks who left with them tended to be white, upper middle income, which left those low income African American folks who were stuck in the most marginalized parts of town, then responsible for sustaining the full infrastructure, the bureaucracy that was Flint city government. And when they inevitably couldn't do it, right, the state took over their finances and said, well, you're profligate, right? You're not managing your finances correctly. We're going to take control. That's when they made the decision to shut down or to change the water source, which ultimately led to the problem. And the same challenge has been that government does not want to acknowledge its responsibility and does not want to focus on how they can get those leaded pipes out of the ground, which is the real issue here.
So speaking of government taking responsibility for these things, we have kind of zooming out a little bit. You have the government very vocal about a lot of things, pretty silent on the Amazon fires and everything that we've got going on right now. Progressive politics is on the rise, trying to tackle that issue with things like the Green New Deal. And one thing that people bring up about progressive politics when it comes to taxation and the Green New Deal is how do you fund all of that stuff? I know on your platform you've also mentioned things like publicly owned broadband as a utility. And so these kind of things, how do you respond to how are we going to pay for this?
So a couple of ways. Number one, the systems that we advocate themselves are usually a lot more efficient. So let me just explain quickly Medicare for All as an example.
Sure.
Right now, our healthcare is provided by a system of for-profit corporate insurance companies. Each one of those for-profit corporate insurance companies has a C-suite. Their CEO makes tens of millions of dollars a year. Tens of millions of dollars a year. They have a marketing budget, advertising budget, and their overhead is 15% of all the money that we pay into healthcare.
Okay.
Right?
Wow.
On top of that, because there are so many of them, on the doctor side, everybody has to know how to bill every different insurance company. All of them have their own protocol. Okay. Another high set of overhead.
Right.
But if you look at Medicare as a system, right, the system that currently exists to take care of people over the age of 65 and those with disabilities, its overhead is 3%.
Wow.
So you're talking about 12% savings just in changing. And everybody's like, well, how are you going to pay for it? I'm like, well, look, I'd much rather pay for actual health care than pay some CEO to make tens of millions of dollars a year to keep me from the health care that I already paid for.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
So that's part one. Part two is this. In our system right now, the rich corporations just don't pay for their fair share. I mean, look, Amazon.
Yeah. Perfect example.
If I made as much as Amazon, I'd pay $4 billion in taxes. You know how much Amazon got away paying in income tax? Zero. So it's not impossible to ask the richest, most powerful institutions in the country to pay their fair share. I think that just makes sense.
Yeah.
And so both the systems themselves are more efficient. Like we are creating a system that biases the profits of big corporations. And if we just ask the rich and the powerful to pay their fair share, we'd have substantially more money. And then the last point is saying, look, our government right now has spent trillions of dollars on making war. And my point is, I would much rather invest in the health care of a kid who doesn't have it right now than invest in an F-35 program to make an airplane that doesn't even fly.
Yeah.
Right? Because some company lobbied government to tell them that this is what we needed next. It's about efficiency in the system, it's about the right priorities, and it's about asking the rich to pay their fair share. It just makes sense.
So we have the money. It's just about directing it in a responsible way.
We have the money. The problem is that the people who have the most of it want to pay the least of it.
Right.
And we're not directing it, like you said, in a responsible way.
Yeah.